Hello viewers, I am Shushai Adane. Ethiopia, since the demise of the Derg regime, had been at peace with itself, and far beyond that, offering the same to many African countries. What happened to that nation today? Meanwhile, there is misunderstanding and disagreement between the federal government and the government of Tigray regional state. In this regard, there are quite different assumptions and speculations. What is the secret behind the curtain? All these issues would be covered in our discussion today. My guest is a long-time diplomat, Ambassador Wondimu Asaminew. Stay with us. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, I know you have served for almost 24 years in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes, and you have been assigned as a diplomat and as an ambassador in different countries. Yes. Yeah. You have been in Nairobi, Kenya?
Yes, I was in Nairobi as a junior diplomat.
Yes.
Later on, I was assigned to the United States.
Washington?
And later, finally, at the end of my career, I was Ethiopian ambassador to Somalia.
Mogadishu, yeah. Okay. Great experience. Let's proceed to our agenda. It is an open secret that the contemporary Ethiopia is known to have a very problematic foreign policy and diplomacy. Why do you think this could happen today?
Yeah, you are right. It's an open secret. The current Ethiopian foreign policy and diplomacy has a lot of problems. In foreign relations, you are as strong as your standing domestically. If you fail at home, you cannot succeed abroad. So the whole problem about the current problems of foreign policy and diplomacy of Ethiopia lies on the fact that the current government has demolished the foundations of a strong foreign policy. Now at home, we are not at peace with ourselves. There is no symmetry between the government and the public, and all political actors for that matter. There is no cohesion among our people. The country is in a very, very serious political turmoil. So if you are weak at home, no one takes you seriously. In fact, now, due to our weakness, there are many countries are emboldened as to bully us around. So one of the reasons why our policy, foreign policy and diplomacy is in problem is that this domestic foundation of a strong foreign policy is now deconstructed. Not only that, you are strong in foreign relations, as strong as your allies, you see. And unfortunately, we have deconstructed now the foreign policy, diplomacy, security architecture we had carefully built in the last 27 years. Now, IGAD is rendered irrelevant. We have disregarded African Union. We are alone. We are isolated. Perhaps the only friend we have, if we are going to call him a friend, is President Isaias, the suspicious actor in the neighborhood. And you see, in foreign relations, if you are alone, it's like a jungle life. In the jungle, when you are alone, you cannot survive. Now, I can say we are alone, we are separated from the herd, and the reason why our foreign policy and diplomacy is weak is because we have, with a sense of vengeance, deconstructed the carefully constructed security architecture we had built. Perhaps there are many other factors, but to add one, again, in foreign relations, you are as strong as the level of professionalism, skill of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, the Ethiopian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, whatever the professionals have the commitment, the skill, is again rendered irrelevant. Diplomacy is concentrated in the palace, in the Prime Minister's office, and diplomacy run by amateurs. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is led by people who may have not sufficient skills and knowledge about the complexity of diplomacy. So the weakness of our foreign policy and diplomacy currently is an outcome of many factors combined. Otherwise, I agree, and it's a public secret that we are not what used to be.
What do you think? I mean, you said those strong foundations of those 27 years are now demolished by the current government. Why do you think that could happen?
I think there are many factors in play here. Perhaps the most important factor is the intention of the current leadership. Their intention is to deconstruct whatever was built by EPRDF. You can observe what's happening at home. The democratic, the constitutional order is being deconstructed. The federal states are as if they don't exist. And law and order is in shambles. I think the intention of the current government is to recreate Ethiopia, and perhaps they want to start Ethiopian political history from the scratch after obliterating whatever was built in the last 27 years by EPRDF at home. The same is true in foreign relations. Whatever we had built carefully to serve the Ethiopian national interests abroad, at a regional level, at a continental level, at international level, they are all deconstructed. So it's part of this drive to recreate Ethiopia at home and abroad. Otherwise, there is no rational explanation, because you can call it a diplomatic suicide to unravel whatever mechanisms, structures you have built to serve your national interests. They have told you now, we don't have now an alliance structure abroad. You have observed what happened on the politics surrounding the diplomacy surrounding the Nile rivers, the Millennium Dam. Even those who are depicted as friends, like Somalia, Sudan, not to mention the Arabs and Egypt, they all stood against us because we don't have the leverage. We have already deconstructed it. So it's a diplomatic suicide, so to speak. But the whole intention of the current government is to deconstruct whatever was built in the diplomatic field and at home at the constitutional political level.
By the way, you said Ethiopia, especially Tigray, your government, sees the relation Ethiopia has with Eritrea with its suspicious eyes, right?
Of course.
What's the reason behind? Why are you suspicious?
We are suspicious not because we are paranoid. We are suspicious because the underlying cause for our conflict with Eritrea are not addressed. It's simply a romantic type of relationship between two strong men, otherwise underlying issues about border demarcation, about compensation, because the Claims Commission had ruled that Eritrea invaded Ethiopia and had ruled that Eritrea should pay compensation to Ethiopia. Now, in that romantic relationship between the two leaders, these underlying issues are not being addressed. And secondly, we are talking about two countries. Countries are not governments alone. Countries are composed of people, of course. Especially, there are so many cultural, economic relationship on the border. So there is no involvement of the adjacent regions like Tigray, Afar, nor there is a transparency in the process. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is the custodian of the Ethiopian foreign relation files. Even the Ministry of Foreign Affairs knows little about it. Even the parliament that has a mandate to oversee the activities, the functions of the executive organs, including the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, doesn't know what is agreed upon, what is the process, what are the schedules. It's all secretive, conspiratorial rapprochement between two strong men. So, especially Tigray, as an adjacent region to Eritrea, and as a victim, the primary victim of Eritrea's aggression, we are worried about what's going on, what is the agreement, what is the secret. So I think it's not that we are against that rapprochement. We are against the processes and the hidden intentions. And what's following up after the rapprochement, the Eritrean government, especially the president, involving Ethiopian political affairs. Internal affairs. And the Ethiopian government really seemingly condoning that. This is not only dangerous in terms of our security, but it's also unacceptable in terms of international relation principles. We are a sovereign land. We don't allow an enemy state like Eritrea and a very belligerent, warlike president like Isaias Afwerki to be a member of the kitchen cabinet in Addis Ababa. Perhaps he is more closer to the prime minister than most of the cabinet ministers, perhaps more than the deputy prime minister. So we have every reason to be suspicious about the intentions.
Okay, how could you compare and contrast with regard to the agenda that we are discussing now, of those 27 years and that of this new government or leadership?
Well, the difference is very stark. The gulf, the difference is so wide that sometimes you wonder, are we talking about the foreign policy of the same country or different countries in different parts of the world?
So you mean it seems of two, extreme things, huh?
Very, very extreme. The behavior, the foreign policy behavior of the current government is not only different from the EPRDF one, is also different from the successive Ethiopian governments in the last perhaps 60, 70 years, if you start from King Haile Selassie's government. Not only that, it's incompatible, the behavior, the foreign policy behavior of the current government is incompatible even with general theory of foreign relations, you see, because in foreign relations, there are permanent interests. There is a permanent interest that doesn't change with a change of government and systems and so forth. This permanent interest perhaps emanates from the very nature of being a sovereign state by your own history, by your geography, and so on. Of course, there are some transitory national interests as governments change, but this government has compromised the permanent national interests of this country with foreign policy principles. It's incompatible with the successive Ethiopian governments. For instance, the first thing that comes to mind is our policy towards the Nile. The Nile is a permanent interest, and we had a permanent policy. For that matter, it was set by King Haile Selassie. And that permanent policy was that Ethiopia doesn't recognize the 1959 Sudanese-Egyptian agreement that apportioned the Nile waters between them, between the two countries. And our permanent policy regarding this was, no, it's not fair, it's not just. We must renegotiate the share of the Nile waters on the basis of international law, on the basis of reasonable and equitable use of the Nile waters. This has always been the Ethiopian position. It's a permanent interest. We had a permanent policy. But the Prime Minister reversed this long-lived Ethiopian policy regarding the Nile. He went to Cairo in front of a camera, the world watching. He swore in the name of Allah that he will not interfere with the share of the Egyptians when it comes to the Nile waters. This is totally unprecedented. So the difference is not with APRF's policy. The difference is with all the policies of Ethiopian successive governments. The same was true regarding Eritrea. We were talking about it earlier. There was nothing mysterious about our conflict. Eritrea invaded Ethiopian territory. It was declared by international organs, the Claims Commission. It was not Ethiopia who said that. So when it comes to our approach towards Eritrea, it must be founded on this basic premise. Eritrea invaded Ethiopia. And the invasion...
Was the international community knows?
Yeah, Ethiopian, we had a Claims Commission that was established to determine the cause of the war between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And the Claims Commission said, it's an international body, it's Eritrea who invaded Ethiopia and provoked the war. And secondly, because it provoked the war and caused hundreds of thousands of lives on both sides and caused the damage of perhaps billions of dollars worth of property, Eritrea should pay compensation to Ethiopia. But again, the current government totally changed the policy, this permanent policy on sovereignty, and blamed the former government that labored to defend the country's dignity and sovereignty. The same was true with the Nile. It blamed all successive governments for fomenting anti-Egyptian phobia and hate in Ethiopia. This is a kind of departure and difference when it comes to the policy of the current government. And on many other issues, especially with the PRDF foreign policy was Africa-centered. For that matter, all successive Ethiopian governments, their policy was Africa-centered, be it Haile Selassie, the Derg, and the PRDF. The PRDF, of course, was the architect on Ethiopian policy at a continental level. Our premise was that African problems must be solved by Africans. But now, this current government is trying to solve African problems, Ethiopian problems, by Arabs. Now our diplomatic capital has shifted from its own capital, Addis Ababa, to Dubai and Riyadh. So I think there is a radical shift in terms of our diplomatic objectives and the diplomatic techniques, instruments used. As I have told you, it has totally deconstructed the Horn of Africa security diplomatic architecture, and now it has gone somewhere afar for purely political reasons, not to serve Ethiopian national interests.
It's play politics, maybe.
It's all deconstructing the country's existing domestic and foreign relations. It's not accidental. It was not done by mistake. It's a deliberate political objective. It's not by mistake. It's not out of ignorance. It's a political design to start a new domestic and foreign relation architecture that serves the interests of the group in power rather than the Ethiopian national interests.
In a given interview, maybe 4 or 5 years back, when you were Ethiopian ambassador to Somalia, you said that Ethiopia, since the demise of the Derg regime, had been at peace with itself, and far beyond that, offering the same to many African countries. How would you answer that question if you were asked today?
Today, as I have told you earlier, we are in a very deep, serious crisis domestically. We are not at peace with ourselves. In any enterprise in life, be it personal, group, or foreign policy, you can only give away what you have, you see. If you have peace at home, we'll give away peace, cooperation abroad. Now, in the last 27 years, they have told with all the problems. I'm not trying to sugarcoat the whole thing, but the trend, the general political, economic dispensation of the country was really at peace with itself. A country at peace with itself, focused on development, focused on resolving long-standing, age-old political problems, be it political, intercommunal, all the individual and group rights. And abroad, in our foreign relations, it was an extension of what we had. For the first time in our history, we had a cooperative relationship with Somalia, with the Sudan, with Djibouti, with Kenya, with South Sudan. Historically, Ethiopia, that giant elephant in the neighborhood, was seen suspiciously by the neighbors due to our history. At one point in history, we had been in some sort of conflict with all the neighbors because we're claiming Somalia, Djibouti, and the rest. But EPRDF, once it established peace, tranquility, and reconciliation at home, it extended that policy to the neighbors. And it required a lot of patience, a lot of tact, wisdom, and understanding. Because we are giants, it's natural that they are afraid of us. We gave them a lot of assurance that we are not out to dominate, to control them. And it required a lot of patience and wisdom. Now we are all over the place declaring that Ethiopia's territory will extend up to the Indian Ocean. The Ethiopian territory will extend to the Red Sea. You see, a giant country like Ethiopia declaring that kind of aggressive expansionist sentiment, you can imagine what kind of problem and insecurity it can cause in the neighboring countries. Now, that relationship of confidence is gone now, at a public level especially. The Somalis, we know them, they are very suspicious of the intention of this current government. Eritreans, understandably, they are very suspicious of the intention of not only Isaias, but also Abiy. They are very suspicious of the secretive deals between the two. We can see what kind of relationship we have with Djibouti. We totally threw away Djibouti in order to embrace Isaias. Now the Djiboutians are very angry, very suspicious. And as I have told you earlier, the real interest, the real position of these neighboring countries was revealed when it comes to their position to the Nile waters, to the Medium Dam, which is a very key strategic matter to Ethiopia. They were against us. Even the governments, though apparently they look like we are friends, we are in love with each other and so on, all this, no. In the corridors of power in the neighboring countries, everyone is suspicious of our intentions. So this is also, again, a reflection of what's happening at home. At home, we are not in symmetry with the government. Every single region is in turmoil. The government, the current leadership, is acting like an occupation force in Oromia, in Amhara, in the south, in Benshangul, and it has sent appointed puppets deconstructing the federal system, and everyone is waiting for its own time. That they are subdued, that they were forced to be silent, doesn't mean that they have accepted. They are waiting for an opportune time to react.
How could you be sure about that? What if they accepted the current leadership? What are the manifestations on the ground that they are waiting for an opportunity? In other words, he said, being silent doesn't mean that you accepted that leadership, yes? Yeah. What are the justifications? How could you say so?
What I mean is, in principle, is there any people, even an individual, who prefers subjugation, suppression, marginalization? There is no. In principle, no one will accept that, and especially Ethiopians, who have sacrificed a lot for their self-determination, for their individual liberty. No, they cannot accept it. Secondly, even under that military type of domination and governance in the regions, there is a lot of resistance. There is a lot of resistance. For the first time, perhaps in 29, 30 years, We have organized armed groups in the country. In Oromia, perhaps half of the territory is under the command post, under emergency administration. The same is true in Amhara. It's not because it was the most preferred form of administration. It's because the government had to subjugate and oppress and control a dissenting people, you see. So there is no any reason that this kind of system can be sustainable.
Okay, let's proceed to another question. It is as clear as daylight that there is misunderstanding and a disagreement between the central government and the government of Tigray regional state. In this regard, there are quite different assumptions and speculations, right? So what's your opinion on that matter? What could be the reason behind the curtain of all these differences?
I think apparently you may say that the conflict, the disagreement is between the federal government, the Prosperity Party and the TPLF and the Tigray administration. It's simply an apparent description of a more complicated problem. The underlying conflict is a conflict of the concept of Ethiopia. What kind of Ethiopia are we looking for? It's an age-old point of disagreement among Ethiopian political forces. So the Prime Minister and his group represent one brand of Ethiopia, while the TPLF represents a multi-ethnic federalist vision of Ethiopia. Now, the conflict is not about the two political forces. The conflict is between these two grand ideas. But the government and its propaganda machinery wants to represent the conflict as if it is between TPLF and the Prosperity Party, or the federal government for that matter. But no. It is because the rest of the federalist forces, as we were talking, were subjugated by force. They feel that they have subjugated them, they are victorious, they have the military force. Now the only remaining force to be subdued is TPLF. So it's a matter of balance of power. In the center, the balance is in favor of the government, and it looks like that there is no any conflict between the two concepts of Ethiopia. But it is there, it's simmering and waiting for a time to explode. Of course, it has already been started to explode. So what I'm trying to say is, this kind of conceptual differences is not bad. What's not acceptable is to impose your brand of political thought on people by force, you see. That's what is trying, the federal government is trying to do. It has tried to weaken Tigray. It has tried to marginalize Tigray, and in the process subjugate it so that its brand of political thought, that unitarist, perhaps monarchical type, I think it has, I suspect that it has that kind of ambition, will prevail. That's the problem. Otherwise, we could have, in a democracy, it's possible that there are incompatible ideas and so on and so forth. The problem is the government is using all its government forces, resources, propaganda machinery to weaken and eventually subdue Tigray. And more dangerously, it is coordinating its conspiracy with an outside force, with an the Eritrean government, especially the president. That's the source of the conflict. The source of the conflict, of course, conceptually can be different, but the whole process of playing politics is totally undemocratic. It's totally authoritarian. And more dangerous, as I've told you, there is that kind of criminal behavior on the part of the central government, in that it's trying to weaken domestic political force by coalescing, by cooperating, by coordinating with an outside government. This is treason by all standards. So the Tigray people are fighting for their own survival. They are fighting for their own self-determination. They are simply trying to protect their constitutionally enshrined rights. So it's visible because Tigray is resisting. Otherwise, the whole underlying problem and conflict is between two visions of Ethiopia, between the unitarists and the multi-ethnic federalist forces. We can't see that. Otherwise, the government tries to depict the whole thing with the intention to mobilize others. That's the problem is TPLF, Tigray. So the only issue we have is with Tigray. No. The whole idea is about what kind of Ethiopia we want to see.
But I would like to know the justification behind your accusation, the federal government, of trying to weaken Tigray. You are simply accusing the central government. What are the realities on the ground, or how could you justify it to the international community or to our audiences, in other words?
I think it's a public secret. It's a public secret. Now, every single TPLF official of the federal government is ousted systematically. Even technocrats are cleansed from the state machinery, or they are marginalized. They are thrown into a very manual and insignificant field of work, you see. Even the security, the military establishment is being cleansed from Tigrayans, as if we are foreigners. It's a very, very reckless, dangerous move. Secondly, the propaganda against Tigray, even against the Tigrayan people, sometimes it borders on genocidal propaganda, you see. Very dangerous, and many Tigrayans are victimized because of that very dangerous, venomous propaganda. For the sake of weakening the TPLF, they have totally generalized the whole thing, and Tigrayans are isolated, attacked in many parts of the world, the country. That discriminatory imprisonment, because they are Tigrayans. Of course, I am not saying that criminals, corrupt officials should not face justice. That's not what I am saying. It's a discriminatory justice. It's a political justice.
So they are being victimized for who they are.
Who they are, not because what they did, okay?
Their identity.
Because of their identity. And you see main roads being closed with the intention to suffocate and really project the message to the Tigrayan people that you don't have any other option but to surrender. Otherwise, we will suffocate you to the death. This kind of very reckless political measures can be, we can talk about the discriminations for 24 hours. Of course, long history, it's long story. But what I'm trying to say is the government, the central government, has systematically tried to isolate, to weaken, to suffocate not only the TPLF, but the Tigrayan people. And this has a very serious repercussion, not only on the democratic order, but also on the very survival of the country. Because if you push people, even an animal as small as a cat, if you corner it, it will fight back, because it's a matter of survival. So I think it's a politically dangerous and really irresponsible way of managing politics, you see. Whatever political interest groups may have, they should not put the unity of the country in jeopardy, see, for the sake of their own personal ambitions, for their own totalitarian ambitions. They are trying to, they are literally unraveling the country. So I can tell so many examples, but it is a public secret, I mean.
I heard that you have written a letter or letters, I don't know, to the international community in the past recent times. Could we have clarification on its very content and purpose?